The CanAsian Arts Network recognizes and pays respects to the original people of this land. For time immemorial, Indigenous peoples have cared for and stewarded the lands known to many as Canada so that each of us today can benefit from all the gifts the land provides. Out of respect for the rights of Indigenous peoples, it is our collective responsibility to critically interrogate colonial histories and their present day implications. We therefore work from the perspective of honoring, protecting, and sustaining the land and the people who are first on this territory to move beyond acknowledgement and into the doing. Similarly, we recognize the impact of colonial history and structures on our own communities and of those of other people of color. We extend a hand in partnership to those who wish to move beyond allyship to become an accomplice in dismantling them. Hello, my name is Vicky Chow. I'm part of the team at the CanAsian Arts Network. I'm a filmmaker and arts administrator, and I'm currently located on Treaty 7 territory in Mohkinstsis, or AKA Calgary, Alberta.
Hi, my name is Sean Tse. I'm based here in Amiskwaci, Waskaekin, Treaty 6 territory, also known as Edmonton and Métis homeland. I'm a filmmaker, father, and also on the CanAsian Arts Network team. Through funding support from Canada Council for the Arts and administrative support from Festival Access AZ, the CanAsian Arts Network has created digital content to guide, mentor, inform, and educate equity-seeking artists, cultural workers, organizations, and festivals in Canada. We're creating a series of digital literacy workshops that will cover a variety of topics on business administration and legal considerations, introduction to social media and digital marketing, and encourage ways to decolonize in the digital space. These workshops will be followed up by a series of community conversations and a roundtable discussion with arts leaders to help us all learn from each other. Make sure to sign up at canasianarts.com to get links to all the online content. So in the next hour and a bit, we'll be together here. You'll have the opportunity to hear from co-founder of And Humanity, Matthew Tsang, and hear his story and his tips on how you can level up how to brand yourself and your work online. Welcome, Matthew. How are you?
I'm doing well. Hello, hello. Thank you for having me. As Sean said, I'm Matthew, pronouns he, him, co-founder of And Humanity. We're an inclusive marketing and communications agency. I'm logging in from the stolen and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. And we at And Humanity work towards truth and reconciliation in a number of ways, specifically, though, and primarily by collaborating with Indigenous folks on our projects and ensuring that they are paid in full in whatever form that they prefer. And I guess today I'm going to focus on telling you the story of how And Humanity and how a small team of 15 folks was born and how it all relates to my personal brand. So I'm just going to share my screen here and get started. For me to tell my story and how it relates to And Humanity, our agency, I got to go way back to this. So growing up, I was obsessed with superheroes. Batman, Superman, Iron Man, you name it, I was obsessed with it. Still kind of am now, but maybe a little bit less. Every Halloween up until I was probably about 8 or 9 years old, I would dress up as like one of these superheroes that I saw on TV. And you can see in the background here, I'm actually still wearing it, and it's Christmas. So that's how obsessed I was with these superheroes. And at around 9 or 10 years old, around that time, I remember looking at myself in the mirror and realizing that I actually looked nothing like the folks that I was seeing on screen. I didn't look like Tony Stark. I didn't look like Peter Parker, etc. And I remember feeling this quick sense of shame right away. And then I decided in that moment that I was never going to dress up as these superheroes I'd idolized because I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. So from then onwards, my parents thought I was obsessed with ninjas. I was not. It's just what I saw on screen that looked like me. So every year from then on, I trick-or-treated in my ninja costume that I slowly outgrew, but that's how long I wore it for. And in my late teens and my early 20s, I realized how much I was trying to reconcile that childhood disappointment. So I joined a publication called Schema Magazine that was run by a diversity, equity, inclusion expert. I didn't know what those words meant at the time. I was in my late teens or so. And we were all about Asian representation in media. We were all trying to focus on highlighting, spotlighting artists, musicians, writers, you name it, and basically telling the world that we belonged on screen and on stage. And beyond Schema Magazine, I did more than that as well. I started my own comedy troupe with an all-Asian cast and crew, as well as my own production company. This is a still from one of my short films, my short stints as a filmmaker, but I started a small production company where we did a bunch of short films, all Asian cast and crew. So I was trying very hard to reconcile my childhood. And moving into fast forwarding to the year 2009, it was a very pivotal year for the world and for myself. I was doing this while I was kind of in school, and a little bit as school was ending, kind of running my production company and running this comedy troupe and kind of working with Schema Magazine. But I wasn't making much money, as you don't in the arts. And school was ending, and I started facing a lot of pressures from parents saying, what are you going to do with your life? Which I'm sure a lot of us can relate to. So again, fast forwarding to 2009, I was around that period where I was a little bit unsure of what my identity was and what I would want to do for the rest of my life and my career. And just to tell you how far back this is and maybe age myself a little bit, 2009 is when this was the most popular phone. Don't ask me what it is. It's some LG phone here. I think it was maybe half touch screen, but 2009 was also the year that Barack Obama was first inaugurated. It was the year that Kanye West did this to Taylor Swift. And most importantly, this was the year that my sister and I, who was in the first picture, founded My Loudspeaker Marketing. It was our first agency together. And this room that we're in was probably, 300 square feet. And we were allowed to use this room because it was our parents', or my mom specifically, old office where she ran her importing, exporting business. And at that time, her business had folded. So we had this office space here. So our mom at the time, not at the time, sorry, my mom had given us an ultimatum. She, just giving a little bit of backstory, but she was a single mother. My dad passed away when I was 5 years old. So she raised us. And she, although was very progressive in certain values, she was very traditional in certain values as well. And one of the things that really made her worried about us is the fact that we didn't really have a lot of direction, or so she said. So she gave us an ultimatum, and her ultimatum was, if you're not out of this office in 1 year, you have to go find what she called real jobs. And we started this agency without any background. All we knew is that we loved creating, and marketing was the responsible way to create things. At least that's what we were told at the time. So we started a marketing agency with no background and no idea what that really meant. But luckily, through a lot of hard work and a lot of pressure, you could say, from our mom, we were out of there actually in 6 months. And we moved into this space. So this is an old vinegar factory. It was 2,500 square feet. It was massive. It was in, I'll just say, the not best part of town, but it was ours. And we were able to lease this space because we partnered with another startup company, a motion graphics agency. And we partnered with them to kind of share this space. And we were able to kind of take this half of the space here where the ladder is, and then they were able to get this half over here next to where the pillars are. So we were able to kind of share this big space, but it was not in a great part of town, so we couldn't bring clients in even if we had any. And these floors were this kind of ugly green linoleum because this place used to be a vinegar factory. And that's why the lease was so affordable. So we were able to move into here. We weren't making any money, but we made just enough to pay off this lease. And because of the ultimatum, we're like, we have to move out of that basement office that we had. So we moved here, and we were doing everything we could to keep the lights on, so to speak. Like I said, we didn't have many clients. The only reason why we were able to move in this space is we got a grant, a federal government grant to launch and promote a specific event. But we were basically living off that one grant and kind of funding ourselves as we were going. So what did we do? We decided to utilize the space. We threw events or rented out spaces for events for people to have their events here. We rented it out for production for other people to shoot their productions and things like that, short films, commercials, etc. And here's some of the material, our marketing material that we had. We claimed to be, the cheapest price per square foot sort of thing because we were in not the best space. But we ended up running more of a rental company than we did an actual agency. And that's because we were just trying to keep ourselves afloat during this time. Here's some of the stuff that we would post and things like that. You see extremely affordable pricing for renting gear and things like that, just again, to keep the lights on. And I like to say that, not like to say, but I like to reflect on the fact that during that time, I ate probably ham and cheese sandwiches for lunch every day for about 4 years because that's all I could afford. And I had moved into an apartment that was nearby, which means it was also not a really nice place to be at. And my sister was living illegally at the office too in that space. So we were really finding a way to make it work in terms of it, because all we really wanted to do was create, but we really didn't have a background on running a marketing agency. So I like to show this image because that's how we felt. We were just keeping our head above water, hoping that we could survive. But over time, as we started developing our skill sets in marketing and creating and doing a lot of pro bono work to kind of get started, get our portfolio out there, we started growing a little bit. These tables here are actually, not this specific one, but the ones back there are actually not linen closets, sorry. They're those large long closets that we converted into tables. So we were able to find every way that we could to kind of scrape to get by. I was the co-founder or the principal, whatever you want to call me. Great title, but I was also the janitor. And we made sure that we, cleaned the office, we rotated chores and everything. We were truly a startup with no background in this work, but we believed in creating work and we loved the work that we were doing. So we kept going at it. And soon we started breaking some more barriers. We started winning awards for some of our work. I think a lot of the reasons why we were lauded for a lot of our work was because we didn't come from a marketing background. We came from an arts background and we just wanted to create. And because of that, we were, coming from a different angle in the marketing industry that was maybe more effective and with a different lens. So we grew and we grew and we ended up moving to a different office here, one that was an actual office. And we had our sign on the wall and everything. This is us pretending to be different Pokemon at Halloween. And we continue growing, continue getting larger. And around this time, this is probably a decade into running this agency and probably only 5 or 6 years of actually being an established business, I would say. This is around the time where Tammy and I kind of were looking at each other and we're thinking, Tammy being my sister, thinking, a marketing agency kind of fell on our lap. It wasn't something that we always envisioned ourselves doing. It was just something that we did to kind of fulfill, like you could say, our passions and things like that. It was the practical way to do it. So a couple of things changed around that point. First of all, Tammy first got pregnant. And with pregnancy comes reflection. So she came to me, this is about 5, 6 years ago now, like I said, about a decade running into the agency. And she said, I'm pregnant, and she started reflecting on what she wanted for her future and her future of her child because of that. So around, I can't remember exactly how many months into her pregnancy, but she came to me with this idea of inclusive marketing, and she explained, it's not multicultural marketing, it's not diversity marketing, it's more substance than that. I want to start an inclusive marketing agency. And she had all these, statistics and these reasons why and all this rationale. And one thing that I would be remiss to not mention is that during the time of when we were starting up, we needed to make money. So not only were we renting out the place, Tammy's working at the Canadian Center for Diversity and Inclusion, and I was doing, odd part-time gigs here and there just to make it work, and also working at the magazine that I was talking about, Schema Magazine. So we were finding different ways to make it work. And we kind of always had this passion in DEI, but didn't know how it linked to this. So when she came to me with this idea, she's like, I want to create a world where, my unborn child can feel like they belong. And she says, marketers have a responsibility and the power to shape culture and society. So I think we can do that. So we went to Adweek in New York to pitch this idea to some of the biggest brands in the world. And remember, this is many years ago. So a lot of the response was quite tepid in the sense of, we see the moral imperative, but we don't really see a business case for inclusive marketing. Like, how do you measure something as intangible as inclusivity? Is there really any value in that? Is kind of what we were being told. So we kind of came back with our heads down, and we're like, okay, we'll continue running our agency. We had continued growing our general smartcom agency at the time, and we're like, why don't we just kind of do this on the side? So we talked to other diversity, equity, inclusion experts as we were running agency, and we're like, hey, this is how an agency runs, from research to strategy to creative to production. This is how an agency runs. How do we make the whole thing more equitable? How can we change the way this industry and agencies work, starting with ourselves? So we started developing a lot of these ideas and theoretical processes, you can say, testing them here and there, again, all off the side of our desk. And then something happened. COVID hit. And COVID was a huge game changer for the industry and for the rest of the world. But what happened during this period is that we were losing clients every single day, literally. And when I say every single day, I mean every day a client was calling us during 2020 and going, hey, we have to pause our campaign, or we have to do this, etc. But there's always a silver lining, or I like to think so. The silver lining was that Tammy and I had a lot more time. And we started thinking, why don't we maybe launch that inclusive marketing agency that we've been talking about for years, right? So come around March 2020, we ended up launching And Humanity. And it was kind of a tepid launch just to our own network, just saying, this is something we believe in. It kind of marries our passions and what we did before, along with what we're doing now in marketing. It got a positive response, but nothing groundbreaking or anything like that. But then 2 months later, George Floyd was murdered. And when I say the next week, I mean it. The next week after that happened, I would say we started getting a bunch of inquiries and a bunch of interest in terms of this work. But one of the reasons why we named ourselves And Humanity was that we never wanted to forget, now that there was a business imperative, we never wanted to forget the humanity side of this. Part of why we do this work is that it's so hard to find deeply culturally nuanced stories and storytelling that isn't either too traditional or too westernized. Like, I'm a second generation Chinese Canadian settler, and my daughter, when I'm trying to look for a book for her, either I find something that's pretty traditional or something that's pretty westernized, but what about those nuances in between? And there's not enough stories out. I mean, there's not enough stories out there that cover that sort of stuff. So a lot of what we're trying to do at And Humanity here was basically start telling stories that are not told. Sorry, this is when we moved to a virtual office. We've got to switch sides here. So that's how And Humanity kind of came about. We launched And Humanity with this idea that there could be a world, it's not mutually exclusive, but a world where we can do good in the world, but also make money. And those are not two opposite or opposing factors, which is what I was taught from a very young age that they are. So we're like, we can do something where you can have the best of both worlds. And that's where we came up with the idea of Anhumanity and the moral imperative behind this work. So it brings me back to this photo here. I show it again because it's important. That's Tammy over there on the right, supporting me as Batman. And I show this photo because it's really important to see how this one event of me seeing myself kind of changed the trajectory of my career and how I thought about myself, and how it in many ways traumatized me, but in many ways informed me, and in many ways directed me. And it's all because I didn't see myself represented. And imagine that what we could do if everybody actually saw themselves represented in the idols that they appreciate, in the leaders that they look up to, and all that came to fruition because of what this photo represents, and what I naively felt that I belonged at the time, but I really didn't. So it kind of ties back to my own personal brand and what I believe in. My personal brand has changed over time, but now in terms of, even if Anhumanity is stripped away and for some reason it doesn't exist, who I am as a person is still Anhumanity. And that's something that I've been looking to find or been trying to find for my entire career. And I just didn't know how to piece that together. So just to give you in some insight into how our agency runs and how it's in expression of our own personal brands, I'm going to start off with this slide here and showing Tammy. So Tammy, like I said, is a certified, or maybe I didn't, but she's a certified diversity, equity, inclusion expert. She worked at the CCDI, the Canadian Center for Diversity Inclusion. So this is a space that she's very competent in. And one of the things that she always wanted to do when running a team is make sure that everything that we say and do externally is replicated internally. We're not performative in any work. So what we have is actually, we have different systems and of course a culture in place that encourages both safe and brave collaboration. So a lot of people talk about safe spaces, which is important. People need to feel safe and to be able to be themselves. But what is brave collaboration? And that's kind of where you can say that our creative backgrounds and mindset kind of came to this point. And what brave collaboration or brave spaces is to us is the ability to be unapologetically yourself when sharing and when creating, and knowing that your differences will be rewarded. So being brave means telling stories or telling your point of view, and trying to break the mold and trying to counter stereotypes with the stories that we tell. So when we say safe and brave collaboration, we always tell the people that we work with that we reward difference. We reward those that are brave enough to tell stories that are not told. We also have systems in place to prevent erasure and manage unconscious biases. But I think one of the main things that we do that's super unique to our team is that we invest, like I said, we're a small 15-person team, but we invest in bi-weekly JEDI training sessions and assignments. So we bring in external speakers, or we have internal speakers, and we talk about everything related to justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and how it overlaps with marketing. We had a session on femvertising. We had one on power and how role power and access power and different types of power play in the creative field, and how it tends to lean very towards the dominant lens. We have sessions on the history of advertising when it comes to different cultures, et cetera, like that, and how people have been tokenized in the past. So we have all these sessions, and everyone is mandatorily has to attend. So everyone from our mid-level staff all the way to myself and Tammy. And this kind of facilitates a culture of what we're saying externally is truly how we act and learn internally as well. And one of the main things that we do is this idea, again, of nothing about us without us. So what we mean by nothing about us without us, and again, is something very close to us as creatives and people in production, is that if you are to tell a story that is about a marginalized or underrepresented community, you better have someone behind the screen, behind the strategy, behind the lens, telling that story. And so often you can see in your field, in Hollywood, you name it, in marketing, that is not the case. What usually happens is someone in a position of power might consult with someone from that field or find some sort of diversity checkbox, but giving someone that comes from that community actual power to influence, change, and tell their own story is rare. So we made it a mission for ourselves to follow this principle of nothing about us without us in all the projects and the work that we do. So if there is a campaign from a brand approaches us and they want to target the rainbow community or people with disabilities or neurodiversities, whatever it may be, we promise that we'll have someone behind the strategy, behind the lens, telling that story and having power and having a seat at the table to tell that story. So that's what we mean by nothing about us without us. And that's why I believe we are extremely unique too, because, you know, as a 15-person team, we can't have all the dimensions of difference in-house. So we've created what we call an allies network, which is a network of folks with different underrepresented from different underrepresented communities, and they are creatives, they are strategists, they are designers, copywriters, you name it. They come from the industry, but they also have lived experience, and they also have high intercultural sensitivity, meaning they don't have internalized racism, internalized homophobia, etc. And we always make sure we do massive call-outs to them and say, you know, this brand wants to target this community. Do you want to work together? If you self-identify under this umbrella, this is a story. You now have an opportunity to tell your story. So part of what we're doing is trying to link folks with lived experience and folks that want to tell stories with brands who have the ability to fund it. So in many ways, we're kind of that bridge and facilitator for telling stories that are deep, raw, nuanced, and culturally nuanced and authentic. And I'll have one last point about how we do things and how it relates here. We have a motto in-house called deep, not wide. Many stories that are told, even beyond commercials, you can say, but in Hollywood, are what we call wide but not deep. So we're trying to go deep and not wide. And wide stories are often, let's hit the diversity quota, right? Let's tell a story that is inherently white leaning or inherently dominant culture leaning, but throw in a Black person there, throw in an Asian person there. Now it is checking all the boxes and we're good. And that's what we call wide stories, because wide stories are told where you can pick and choose people from underrepresented communities, but the script or the story doesn't change. You can replace them, right? So it's like, it doesn't matter who's in it because the story is inherently told by someone from the dominant lens. So what we mean by deep stories means tell stories that are often not told, that usually means focusing on those from underrepresented communities. So you see it you see Hollywood is catching on slowly, like movies like Crazy Rich Asians, shows like Never Have I Ever, Heartstopper, etc. These are stories told by and from underrepresented communities. And Hollywood and other industries are realizing that these stories actually have mass appeal. It doesn't mean that if you tell a story that is told by an Asian person, that only Asian people will resonate with it, which is what we've been told all our lives. Now we're saying, hey, people from all different communities, even the dominant culture, want to hear stories that are often not told, and they find it interesting and they find it different, and people are naturally drawn to it because for centuries we've heard the same story over and over again. So of course we want to hear different stories. So what we try to do and what we try to convince the brands and the clients we work with is to tell deep stories. These stories are deeply culturally nuanced, raw, authentic, and stories you don't hear in the mainstream. And if you tell these deep stories, we guarantee that they will have mass appeal, that it will not just resonate with that underrepresented community that you're featuring and spotlighting. So in general, we've created this agency that really aligns with what we want to see in the world personally. Our mission is to lead brands to leave a legacy of belonging. We say a legacy of belonging because often organizations might want do a one-off project or a one-off thing, a one-off training, etc. But that's not what inclusion is. It means leaving a legacy, which means continuous, sustained, ongoing work. And inclusive consumer experiences, we like to highlight the fact that what we mean by inclusive consumer experiences is that you're not just focusing on the what or the output. Consumers are now focusing on the how and the why. And they have the internet to really dig into what that means. So I use the example of the live action Mulan movie where it's great. We had a bunch of representation on screen. Excellent. But who was the director? Who was the writer? Who was the costume designer? All white people, right? And it's okay, but it's also not okay because a lot of people saw that as progress, but some people saw that as the finishing point too, right? And I think it's on us as people from the industry and the community to not accept that, to go, no, we deserve to tell our own stories. Why is it that you couldn't find someone with the right lived experience to tell that story? It's not that we don't exist. It's just the way things have always been done. So when we talk about consumer experiences, what we're really saying is not just the output, the final movie, the final commercial, but who is behind that work? Why are they behind that work? How was it done? And that's the full consumer experience that we're trying to illuminate. That's important for the work that we do. So yeah, these are some of the brands we work with, and yeah, so that's us in a nutshell. I want to tie again how this obviously relates back to branding and my personal brand. I would have never founded this agency if I did not understand what my own personal brand was. When it comes to your personal brand, it's so much of it is self-actualization or working on yourself to find out who you really are, and then expressing that to the world, knowing that even if it seems really niche or it seems very finite or specific, it will have a lot more appeal than you think. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, Matthew, for all the ideas you've shared and your personal story and your journey and getting to where you are now. I think that's really important to kind of share that relatable experience for artists who are trying to figure out their brand and to build upon that. So thank you for that. Yeah, so we wanted the opportunity to ask a few follow-up questions to your presentation, and I'll have Sean start.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot that we can see there of how, you know, the brand that you guys and the company that you've created really relates to your own personal story. I'm wondering for artists who are starting to explore or really within their artistic practices, like think about how they should be branding their work, thinking about how they should share, whether you have some like tips or some recommendations for how they should start. Is it just about like writing kind of like a timeline down, or yeah, just any types of recommendations in terms of getting deep and not wide?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I actually, have a methodology that I can go through, but before I go through that, just to express in terms of the importance of a personal brand and why yeah, why I'll explain in a second. But basically, your brand is a way of expressing yourself to someone or people who may only take 30 seconds to learn about you. Everybody, I believe, is interesting and has a story. Like that curiosity is part of what fuels who I am and part of my identity. But I do truly believe that everybody has an interesting story and has depth behind them. But unfortunately, in the world we live in, we can't get to know everyone on that deeper level. So a brand for me is a way of being able to express yourself very quickly, so people get a nugget of that depth in a very quick way. Your brand, of course, has to be authentic all the way through to you, because once they do get to know you, it has to be like that's authentic to you. But that way of expressing yourself quickly is something that needs to be shareable, accessible to different audiences. So in many ways, it is just don't see it as compromising yourself, but see it as a short story of yourself, a way to express yourself in a quick way, in a way that's accessible to people that maybe don't have the time to get to know you on that deeper level. They have to understand you right away. So if you're developing your own brand, think about that. But like I said, most importantly, make sure it is your authentic self, because eventually they'll get to the core of who you are if that brand is attractive enough, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, I mean, when you speak about branding, it's it's a very corporate type of word. It's a very marketing type of word. So for someone who's works as an individual artist who's sort of not really part of that world, can you explain why branding would still be important to them, and how do you think how how should they be thinking about it when it comes to their own practices, whether they're a visual artist like a painter or a sculptor, all the way to someone who's working in craft-based media like ceramics or jewelry.
Obviously. It all comes down to the why, right? And it's kind of like I was saying earlier, like we all have an interesting why or an interesting story behind why we do what we do. Like I said, when I was starting out, I was a filmmaker, I was in theater, I was doing things that maybe I wouldn't brand myself as that if I were looking back. I would go back to the core of the why I was doing those things. And why were I doing those things? I believe that people that look like me belong on stage and on screen. That was my personal brand. So I think trying to dig at the why you exist and why you do what you do is maybe like you said, branding is very corporate speak, but it's very simple. It's just why is it, what is your purpose? Why do you exist? Why do you do what you do? And then having that be the, you can say, key message or the main thing that you talk about should be the core. So if I would look back, like I said, I would not brand myself or as what I do, but rather why I do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm curious. It seems like COVID was a very pivotal thing for humanity, and so yeah, what do you think is this new world that we're kind of approaching when it comes to DEI? Like, and yeah, how should folks that are like considered BIPOC like be framing themselves within these kind of new paradigms, or is it just like a trend and it'll go all back to the way it used to be? Like what kind of are your insights around that?
I think the cynical part of me might think it's a trend, but I've seen enough difference and change in society and the way people speak that I don't think it is. And part of it is that, the younger generation, I always say, is more politically, environmentally, and socially conscious than the generations that preceded them. I'm an older Gen Y folk, and I believe every generation starts some sort of revolution in society. I believe our generation started the digital revolution, or progressed it, because maybe that was more Gen X that started this, but Gen Y, millennials kind of like pushed it to be a primary way of dealing with each other, as we are in a Zoom meeting right now. But I believe Gen Z and the preceding or the younger generations, what they will revolutionize is that inclusion is no longer an option or no longer a layer. Inclusion is innovation. Inclusion is the future, and it's not something that is debatable anymore. Not that it was in the past, but it was almost ignored before. So you can't ignore it anymore. I always use the example of the trend that started on TikTok, quiet quitting. I'm sure y'all have probably heard of that. And a lot of the older generation was like, "Oh, this Gen Z is so lazy," and quiet quitting is like, they're so lazy, they don't want to work hard, blah blah blah. Which were similar things that were said about our generation before too. But the thing is that it's not laziness. They just have they understand boundaries better. That's really all it is. Like if I like, just to reveal by myself, like with my own counselor, like she always tells me I need to set better boundaries, and because I don't know how to. Wasn't taught that when I was young. Gen Z at such a young age already understands boundaries, and that's what quiet quitting is. It's about setting boundaries between work and life. Work is not everything. It's all the things we preach but don't know how to practice. So if you talk about a generation that truly understands inclusion, diversity, equity, inclusion, understands mental health, and understands what we're doing to the environment, understands I don't want to say this crassly, but understands all the lies involved in politics and things like that, that truly want to do something about it, that's what they're going to change. And so much of it is overlap with diversity, equity, inclusion, and that type of work. So I see that as kind of like what that generation is going to change naturally. Did I answer the question? I'm trying to, I just went on a rant there. Sorry.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, if I didn't, ask it again.
It's all interesting. Like,
Yeah.
I have more questions. Vicky, do you have any?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, some of the things that we were talking about, because this sort of workshop is geared to more to artists who are just starting out, and
Absolutely.
as artist practices evolve, like you said, you used to be in film and then theater, and then you tried your hands in many different mediums. So how do you see branding as part of that evolution as well? So,
Absolutely.
as they grow as an artist, how do they grow their audiences with them without losing the previous sort of group that was, maybe was interested in your work as a photographer, but then you suddenly, go into film or do something totally 360 and go into painting instead? How do you kind of keep that sort of brand and story and identity still kind of with you?
Yeah, I love that question. I hate to repeat myself, but it's definitely all related to the why. All the things that you're mentioning with your painter, like I said, I was doing a bunch of things, even things that I didn't even list when I was telling my story, because I was obsessed with arts. I was into poetry and I was into writing at that time too. So I did a bunch of things in that field. What I missed at the time was kind of like you're saying, people defining themselves by what they do and not why they do it. And that why is the essence of your personal brand. If you can find out why you are changing from this to this, it should be all tied together, because people maybe unconsciously make these decisions of why they want to start doing this way. Maybe it's a different way of expressing the same story that they want to express. When they do pottery versus when they write, they're all just expressing what's inside, right? And that's why they always say the best artists are the ones that have lived life and have gone through things, sometimes struggles and things like that, because they're just expressing what's in here. So I think that finding that why is that tie between when you grow your audience and when you change. You don't have to necessarily change. Actually, you cannot change who you are, because then you have to build a whole new audience again, all over again, because they're not following because they're following your what and not your why. So it all starts with that why. And I can give a quick tip here in terms of finding out maybe an effective why. This is kind of like a brand positioning exercise, take it or leave it in terms of it. But internally, you can write down, you can draw a Venn diagram with 3 different circles. So one circle at the bottom here, that one circle is your internal values, your why, the things that you believe in. List them all out, right? And then up here on the left, you can call them target needs, the things that your target needs from you, the things that the people that you're trying to quote unquote sell yourself to, sell your art to, or whatever it may be. And then you have here that last Venn diagram, or that last circle of the Venn diagram, is competitor gaps. What are things that the other artists or other folks that are also selling to that target is not providing, that you provide, what your difference essentially. So what you do first is you list all the things, and then you try to find something that encompasses all 3, something that is true to your why, something that is something your target or who you're trying to sell to needs that, and also something that competitors or other people don't provide or don't do well or don't do as well as you, right? The gaps of your competitors. So that's a very simple, effective tool, or you can say branding exercise to figure out your why in a way that you can not guarantee, but be more assured that it's an effective why, because your why can be very vast, right? I have many whys beyond the one that I'm living right now, but this has one that has kind of met those 3 different pillars, you can say.
I was going to ask actually about, just prompts or different types of like tools, and then you kind of answered it with the Venn diagram example. But are there other you know, simple prompts that you think have been really effective in really unearthing that why? I think I have a lot of trouble with that as well, just in terms of, sometimes when you're creating, like I love just like experimenting sometimes, and you don't really necessarily have that much time to like reflect about it before you're like doing it, right? And so until you kind of sit down on your computer and start like really just reflecting, it then becomes like potentially hard, especially, I wouldn't say that I'm like a writer, and so it really like almost a vulnerable space for me, and I feel like that can be, depending on what type of artist you are and how comfortable you are with writing. So I'm curious.
Absolutely. Yeah, great question. I think like everybody's path is going to be different to finding that. I think honestly, like this sounds silly, but or maybe not. But seeing a counselor, like seeing a counselor, the reason why it helps is because they ask the deeper questions that you are either avoiding yourself, or you don't have the time to answer. So you're setting aside space, whether 45 minutes, an hour and a half, whatever you book with them, to work on yourself, right? To really understand why you are the way you are. It took me a long time to realize why. I didn't know as I was doing it, in terms of running that production company or doing those short films and doing that. I didn't know what I was really chasing. I only knew after I really took time to understand myself, reflected. I was like, oh yeah, I was obsessed with Asians on screen and on stage. Like I was obsessed because I was trying to fix what I was so disappointed in. Like it takes time to figure that stuff out. And maybe you know it now, but maybe you don't. Like you're saying, maybe you don't, but I guarantee that there's always a reason why people do things. It's just a matter of fact of unearthing what that is. And I think starting with counselor, there was also something that was sillily really helpful to me too, because looking back is what kind of counseling does, I think, a lot of time, which I think is super helpful, but also looking forward was super helpful. I was asked through a business coach of mine to put together a life goals document. This is not a business goals document. It's like, where do you see your life being here? What is success defined for you? Is it having a young family? Is it having this, whatever it may be, and that really helped center, because I was realizing, oh, this is the type of relationships I want. How do I create that? And then I was realizing that it was pulling stuff from, all facets of my past, present, and kind of like creating that future and that I had in mind for myself. I think that looking into your past and your future are helpful, but they're all ways of looking internally about what you truly feel about certain things. So the next time, like a lot of the times when I was in I'm more so involved in the arts, I was quote unquote chasing the money, in the sense so that I could create while surviving, which is a lot of what people I know in the arts do. It's unhealthy, but it's also a necessity a lot of the times. Like I got to chase the paid project, even though it's compromising my values or whatever it may be. And that's okay. What I say to those things is that find the value within those projects. Either the value is a stepping stone towards what I want, or the value is within that project itself. This is that part of the story I want to tell, or this is that one thing I want to do as part of this project that will, give me a point, or give me a step up to so I'm a little bit different, or I'm changing society, or changing something towards what I'm doing. So it's kind of looking at it as like, it doesn't have to be there right away, but like slowly I will get to what I ultimately want. Hope that answers the question too. Talking.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I mean, for those artists who kind of went through those exercises and kind of found their branding and their why of what they do, and how are they going to be able to control and protect their brand as their practices start growing, and like how do they continue sort of these branding strategies as they keep doing that. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's one thing I actually have talked about a lot in the past, not today, but we use the analogy. It's called the tennis ball analogy. And the tennis ball analogy is that when you imagine that you're communicating with someone and telling them your why or telling them your personal brand, a lot of people will communicate and they will say a bunch of things about themselves that define themselves. And more is not always better. So I use the analogy of the tennis ball, or we do, where if I were talking to you, Vicky, and I was telling you about myself, and I threw 10 different tennis balls at you, how many are you going to catch? Like three, maybe four or five, if you just like really quick with your hands. I don't know. But like, say you catch like three or four or five, and I'm like, telling you who I am, and you have these five balls, and I say, go tell Sean or go tell other people about myself, because word of mouth is huge, obviously, with brand. So you go tell Sean, you throw the five at him. How many is he going to catch? Two, three, like something like that. And it goes on and on and on. And then I finally talked to someone. I was like, oh, that someone tells me, hey, I've heard of you before, Matthew Tsang. You're this, right? This one tennis ball. I'm like, well, no, I'm these 10 different things. How do you only get that? And so I use that analogy because I say one tennis ball is enough as long as you know what that tennis ball is. So you should talk about protecting your brand as you grow and whatever, is just find that one tennis ball and only throw that one, right? So I can tell you my story and everything about myself, but because it's so underpinned by something very specific about justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and marketing, and that's who I am, and all the other tennis balls underpin who I am based on that and what I support, it's easy for you to tell people about what I believe in, etc. Or it should be. If it's not, it's because I'm rambling. But the idea behind it is that you should have that same tennis ball for yourself, and you will always be protected because you're not throwing the other tennis balls. You're only throwing that one. So no matter what, if people talk about you, they're gonna know your one tennis ball.
That's a really hard exercise for me because, and I wonder about that with other artists. And maybe there's like that there's a bit of that stereotype of not wanting to be boxed in, right? Like even if I am in
I
film,
totally agree.
I recently am part of a public art piece, and
Yeah.
so I'm doing not just film. So then it's just like, how do you contain all that in a
But again, you're categorizing your what, right? Those are what you're doing, right? So
yeah.
Sean, if you look into your why, it doesn't matter what you're doing. Your
Mm,
why will always stay consistent. So I don't define myself as, oh, I'm an agency runner. What is even the word? I don't even use those words, right? I
mm,
talk about my why because I think that you probably have, like, based on our conversations, you do have strong whys. You just haven't, found that one tennis ball. But yeah, I think, yeah, like you said, a lot of people don't want to be boxed in, but that tennis ball is not boxing you in. If anything, it's amplifying all the different boxes you're a part of. Because again, people don't have time to really get to know all your different categories that you're part of, but they do have a chance to get to know that one tennis ball. So find that tennis ball that stretches across all the what's that you are, all the things that you do, in terms of it. And then yeah, I think there's possibility there.
I really appreciate these conversations because I think you know, they break down a bit of this like, somewhat like businessy side of arts, and start going into like aspects of like self-care, community care. Like how do we, as a racialized community, start embedding these kind of, I think, important practices for continuing to do the work, but also like seeing like really like underneath it all like some great value of ourself, right? And so um like is there, are there ways that you like take care of yourself as this journey like kind of moves forward? Like I think that there's, it's a very vulnerable space as well, right? So I'm curious if you
Yeah,
have any
for
kind
sure.
of like experiences or things that you can share that really talk about like um yeah, that it's not
Self-care.
it's not just about finding the why, right? Like there's probably like spaces where you are gonna like maybe trigger something or hit certain parts of it where certain things are unearthed
Yeah,
that are
that's definitely.
shocking or whatnot.
Yeah, it's part of why this work is exciting too, because we dig below the surface for everything. So yeah, I'll find things that trigger me that I didn't expect to, and then obviously, yeah, definitely tip like counselor, totally worth it. That's a huge part. But like part of self-care, in terms of that, is that, you know, I'm maybe not the best because I do have, like I said, boundary issues. I have a lot of things that I'm working through myself um that is so inherently ingrained in me that I need to unlearn that stuff or that perception, etc. Um but I guess like in terms of that personal journey, everyone's going to be on their own, scale and things like that. I think to answer the question around like what for me really made a big difference is that, coming from an arts background, what I always battled with was, can I create art and make and be financially okay at the same time? And often the answer was no, right? That's just often the answer that I ran into. And I wish I knew at the time that those are not opposing forces. Like I really wish I understood that. And it's not just because I'm in marketing, but there are so many opportunities that I see now, especially how the world is changing, that it doesn't have to be that case. So if we as a community too can there's a lot of things that especially come from the Asian community where arts are not respected, to be honest, like especially from the older generations, arts are not respected as something like, they want you to be a doctor or lawyer, business, like economist, I don't know, all the things I didn't want to be, and those were things that were actually told to me by my mom. It's like, can you be a doctor? Can you be a lawyer? She was so excited when I was taking some pre-law courses. Couldn't stand it. Like, I was like, sorry, I cannot do it. So I ended up just going into English literature because I love to read and write. Like I just always loved art, right? That was kind of the thing that always compelled me. And so I had this dichotomy is like, if I'm going to be successful in terms of monetarily, I have to compromise who I am and my values. And now I'm realizing that that's not true, and that there's more art opportunity if you stick to, again, that why, and you stick to who you are. Because, like I said earlier, everyone is unique and has a fascinating story. The way the world is changing is that people are demanding or wanting difference now. They're celebrating difference. They're wanting uniqueness. So you look at stories that are being told in Hollywood. You look at how even in the marketing industry, what we're pushing for. I'm not getting like 100% resistance as I would have 10 years ago or something like that. I'm getting people going, I understand the younger generation, even global citizens now do want to hear unique stories. They do want to hear from underrepresented communities, and they do want to pay for it. Like, and it doesn't have to be a mutually exclusive sort of thing. I think we've been so conditioned, especially myself being older, that those have to be opposite things, and you have to compromise in order to do that. So I think part of my own personal journey was realizing that that's not the case as long as I keep fighting for it. Society's not there now, but give it 10, 20 years, our children, our children's children, I think they'll be flourishing because they'll be like, I'm able to produce and be an artist and do what I want. And I know I can actually make a very solid career out of it, which was not the case when I was growing up. In terms of it was a joke when I was growing. It's like, yeah, right. What are you gonna do with that, English literature degree? Like, like that was a lot of or what are you gonna do with that, with the short films you're making? Yeah, right. That sort of thing. So I think the world is changing, and I think society is going to demand more and more of these unique stories. So, like, yeah, going back to the question about like taking care of yourself, I think that would have been the thing that I wish I maybe learned earlier, is that art and commerce can coexist, and they can coexist happily. And yeah, it's nothing about, yeah, there's no compromise needed.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
That's like
absolutely.
very, yeah, just such a beautiful message. And I'm also, as a father with a toddler, like it really puts some of my um I don't know, concerns about his future, like, because I think deep inside, yeah, there's, even as parents, you're always worried about, like, am I doing enough, right? Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
setting up enough to have a child that has a bright pathway, right? And so
Absolutely. Well, I
it,
think we're just like we're conditioned to think that there's a finite amount of jobs or careers, right? That's what we've been taught. But jobs and job titles or job industries are exponentially growing. By the time your child, who's taller, mine too, is 20, there's going to be, I don't know how many more. I know there's empirical data, but there's going to be exponentially more types of jobs, things that you've never even thought of before. So, and you know why? Because we're so globally connected. So if they have a specific niche that they're passionate about, something you've never heard of, say it was like, I don't know, something you've literally never heard of before, there's going to be a job for that. You know why? Because there's going to be community that also supports that. And where there's community, where there's support, there's money, right? And because we live in a capitalist society, unfortunately, but that's just how it is. So like these niche communities are not as niche as we think because we're so globally connected. Look at the amount of subreddits that exist on Reddit. The amount of subreddits is like, I cannot believe that there's something specifically for that thing. And there's hundreds of thousands of members for that specific thing. There is something for everyone now. And I don't say that lightly. I say that truthfully. So if you're not living your authentic self, you're missing out. You're missing out folks that, you know, you can truly connect with and talk with and share ideas with and grow your careers with. But yeah, like it's something I worried about before, but like I'm less worried now. So, you know, everybody always wants, you know, the kid to do whatever they want, but there's that side that, you know, back of the head where, oh, maybe you should be a doctor, like, you know, sort of thing. But, you know, I think all the stats kind of prove that there's a lot more opportunity than we can even see because we're kind of in this mode, but soon it'll be like this. We'll see all these things that kind of exist.
Well, I mean, like, you know, CanAsian Arts Network is definitely like a good example of that, right? Like
Absolutely.
you know, I would have never imagined being able to create content that really centers the Asian experience for artists, right? And so, you know, I think that's basically how we found each other, right?
Yeah,
Like and
absolutely.
humanity and how we connected. And so yeah,
Absolutely.
it's definitely a really bright future and you know hopefully I think a lot of the lessons that you've kind of passed to us and offered us today are going to stick with folks to kind of build on you know a lot of the stuff that they're doing. I do have one last thing that I'm wondering if you can share is any resources or any books or just anything that you think would be a great starter for folks that are thinking about branding as artists.
I have one. I'm sorry, I don't have as much prepared as like, but Simon Sinek has this short, Simon Sinek has this short video about branding, and he draws this diagram of the why, the how, and the what, which is a lot of what I'm talking about. Well, a lot of marketers or branders refer to this video. I think it was in a TED Talk. And that is a super useful video to kind of explain in very specific terms how any brand should operate or how any brand should be created, you could say. And again, it starts with why. I think that's what it's called. It starts with why, and kind of what I've been preaching today. But a lot of people at the highest levels, you can say, if there's a hierarchy of this, of branding, marketing, etc., refer to that idea of starting with why for the work. Because it's easy to get lost, especially if you're a big conglomerate, huge corporation, and lose your why. But as individuals, what's great about us, what's great about your personal brand versus, you know, an organization brand, is a personal brand is not only close to you, so and you have a little bit more control, but also you're starting with a blank slate. And I like that idea because, you know, a lot of, you know, brands that have already established identities or reputations, etc., it's super hard to shed that reputation and start anew or say, you know, start with a different why now or something like that. But you as an individual, right? Like people restart all the time. So it's not daunting, right? And you could be describing yourself as your what right now, and then all of a sudden realize your why. It doesn't require, you know, hundreds of people within an organization like it would to like adopt this and understand it and socialize it, whatever it may be. Now it's just yourself, and you get to reinvent or retell your own story. So I love that opportunity that you get. So yeah, Simon Sinek's It Starts With Why is probably a good resource. A small plug, we just released our authentically inclusive marketing book. We have a book launch event in a couple of weeks. I was going to tell you about it, Sean, but We have that as well. But that's for folks who are interested in inclusive marketing, communications, etc., which may not be the case. But definitely something that when you said book, that's what I thought about right now because that's on my mind. But
Nice.
yeah, definitely the Simon Sinek video.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Matthew, for joining us today. We're grateful to have the support again of Canada Council for the Arts and Festival Access Z to making this CanAsian Arts Network project possible. If you are an Asian Canadian artist looking for more support, visibility, and community connection, we'd love to invite you to join the free network at www.canasianarts.com and follow us on our social media platforms.
And we hope this online workshop has been helpful for your artistic journey. And we recognize that there's much more to learn about branding. So for more in-depth discussion, you can log into your CanAsian Arts Network to access your online groups. And if you go specifically to the group Social Media and Digital Marketing, we'll be able to add some of the resources that Matthew has chatted about today. So hopefully we will see you online.
Thanks, Matthew.